what's up everyone? It's Mike Mangialardi here from Coding Artist, and in this video I wanted to do another real-world application of CSS animations, and that is to make an interactive infographic. So first things first, what is an infographic? So an infographic is just a static image like you see in front of me that is meant to be a visually appealing way to give off main points of information. So for instance, this infographic is titled The Distance Between the Sun and the Planets. And so there's a bunch of different planets, and it just names the planets and gives the distance of that planet from the sun. So someone can look at this infographic, they automatically know what information they're going to get from it, and they can just read through it quickly and extract all the information. And this is really popular right now with content marketing. So a lot of blog posts, instead of writing a summary to kind of summarize all the main points that were written, all the text from a blog post, they can just throw in an infographic, which is going to be a visually attractive way to just summarize all the main points of information from a blog post. Some even just post a blog post itself as just an entire infographic. So as you probably experience, a lot of times you might be reading a blog post and you think the topic is interesting. You don't want to read all the fancy story behind it. You just want to get the main facts of information. So you can do that by using an infographic. So again, it's adding more than just like a summary checklist in text on a web page, but it's also not forcing people to watch a video if they, just want to read. So it's a really cool thing that's being used a lot now. And what isn't being used is adding animation to these. And so we can actually use front-end skills to make some animation happen on an infographic. So ideally what would happen is this entire image would be created from scratch, and I would do the background, the sun, all the different text. And what I'm going to do is, instead of creating from scratch to save time, is I'm going to use this tool called canva.com. It's basically a way to create graphic design from templates. And just to save time, I'm going to take this infographic and I'm just going to remove some of the planets. Then we're going to take some vector graphic planets that I've already created, export them as SVGs, and then we'll load this infographic image without some of the planets, and we'll import it into a web page. And then we'll also import SVGs, which we'll be able to control their CSS properties to add animation and some other cool stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look at this infographic and remove some of the planets that we don't need. And so I'm going to go and click on Neptune. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of Mars. And I'm going to get rid of Venus. And then I could just go ahead and download this, and it would download this entire infographic without some of those planets. So I've already done that, so I won't do that now. But let's go to Affinity Designer, where I have these vector graphic planets I've already created. So how I created these is pretty simple. I just went ahead and opened up Affinity Designer, and I dragged out a circle, and then I just put other inner circles within this larger circle, and then I changed the color. So we have a lighter big circle and then 3 smaller dark circles, and that was enough to create the look of a planet. I purposely try to keep this very simple. So I've created these 3 vector graphics, and I've grouped the images together so they're all called red planet, yellow planet, and blue planet accordingly. However, if we look, there's different shapes that make up all of these planets. So we're going to have to give these different shapes names to optimize our image to be exported as an SVG. And this will make a lot more sense once we see the actual code that we can paste into a web page that renders as a graphic such as we see here. So for instance, I'm going to go to this planet right here, and I'm going to click on these different shapes. So here I know this is the outer light red circle, so let me call it red outer circle. And then we have 3 more shapes which are these inner circles. I'm going to name them accordingly. So here I'm going to call it red inner circle left, red inner circle top, and red inner circle right. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of these. Alright, so I've successfully named all of the shapes that are part of our 3 different planets, so we can reference them later. So now let's go ahead and we're going to have to export these as SVGs. So to do that, I just select each planet, I go to File, Export, and then I'm going to hit Selection Without Background and make sure the SVG is collected when we're exporting this. I'm going to hit Export, and I'm going to call this Blue Planet. And then I'll do the same for our yellow planet. So SVG, Selection Without Background, and then I'm going to call Yellow Planet. And I'm going to export our red planet as an SVG. And we'll be all set. Alright, so now that we have all of our SVG files exported, now we have to import them to a CodePen project I have. But first, let's set this CodePen project up so we can import this other graphic that we had created, which will be the main background. So let's go ahead and do a div class of equal to Infographic. And so this is going to be the container for our image. So I'm going to do Infographic, and then I want this to be position relative, margin auto, and display block, so it will be centered. Then I'll do margin top 8%. And then I'm going to do a border so we can see this container. And I'll do 6 pixels black. And then I'll have to define a height of 1,000 pixels. And then a width of 400 pixels. So here we have a long container that will be for our infographic. But first, I'm also going to add a background for our entire web page. So I'm going to copy this hex code, and I'm going to add this background really quickly. So I'm going to do body background, and I'm going to paste in this color like so. All right, so now it's time to put our image tag, which is going to contain the infographic image that we had downloaded earlier. So I'm going to be able to get this source link by using the CodePen Assets Manager, which is only available if you have CodePen Pro, but it's a really cool way to be able to easily get image addresses for local image files. So let me go ahead and find this infographic that we had downloaded. Here it is, infographic, and I can upload it to the Asset Manager, and now I have a source link. So that's a cool perk of CodePen Pro that I really enjoy. But anyways, I'll paste that into here. And now we're going to have to specify the size that we want for this image. So I'm going to give this a class of poster. And I'm just going to specify that this is going to be positioned absolute. And we want it to be a height of 100% and a width of 100% for the container that we just created. So there we have our infographic now fits in nicely into the container that we had created. So what we're going to do next is add those planets that we had exported as SVGs, and then we could add some animations to them so we have a cool animated infographic. So let's go ahead and import the SVG files that we had just created. So I'm going to go ahead and find them. And then what we can do is we can drag them each into the Chrome browser, and it will render them, and we can right click, view page source, and now we'll have all of the SVG code. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste that in here. So now we have a SVG, which we can't see. So let's go ahead and give it a class so we can update its CSS properties. So I'm going to call it Blue Planet. And I'm going to get rid of the styling it already has of its width and height. And let me add this CSS class. So we called it Blue Planet. I'm going to do position absolute. I'm going to do z index 2 so it's above our poster, not behind it, like so. And I'm going to do a height of 20%, a width of 20%. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust the top and left so I could get it in its right position. So we'll try that. That's too low, so I'm going to change to the top of 10%. And let's do 13. That looks about right. Now let me adjust this left percentage. And there we go. We have one of our planets that now is fitting and looking like an infographic. However, this planet is an SVG. So what exactly does that mean? So as you can tell, there is all this lengthy SVG code that we had pasted in there. So what is that? Well, let's take a look. So here we have one tag that is an ellipse. And so what this is referring to is just like in our vector graphic tool of Fade Designer, we have an ellipse tool where we can create an ellipse. So what this code is actually code for these different shapes that we had created that are part of this vector graphic. So why we had to name all these specific shapes is now that we can look, if you look at these ellipse tags, they have IDs. For instance, we see this is ID blue outer circle. So this entire ellipse tag is code for styling this outer circle of this SVG blue planet. So it's all one SVG code, which is our entire planet. However, we can do animations and change CSS properties for the specific shapes that make up this entire blue planet image. So for instance, we can go to our blue inner circle right, which is right here. And here there's a style for a fill. We can go ahead and change that fill to white. And now we see that this has a fill of white instead of having a fill of this darker blue color. So this is really cool because we can go ahead and add classes and add custom CSS values like we would if we were creating something like a pure CSS image. So what this allows us to do, and this is the cool part of SVGs, is that you can create images through a vector graphic GUI and then bring them into a web page instead of having to create all these images with pure CSS. So in real world applications, it's usually the most beneficial. However, it is more of a learning curve, which is why I usually stress pure CSS images first. And pure CSS images, I think, are a bit better practice for CSS as well. So it's really beginner friendly. But SVGs are really powerful and really cool. So again, as we can see, we can look at all the specific shapes of an image and control their CSS properties dynamically. So we'll add animations later, but first let me go ahead and change this back to the color it was originally. And let's add in our other planets. give them a class for the entire image, and then we can do some cool animations to make this be changing CSS properties for the specific shapes within that image. All right, so let me go ahead and do the same thing that I did with the yellow planet. So I'm going to drag it into Chrome. I'm going to right click, view page source. I'm going to get this SVG code. And I'm going to paste it in right below this blue planet that we had. I'll get rid of the width and height that it has by default, and I'm going to give it a class of yellow planet. So we can do something very similar to blue planet. We're just going to have to change its top and left. So let me paste this, rename it to yellow planet. And then I'm going to go ahead and change its positioning. So I'm going to want it where Venus is. So let me bring this down. And there we have Venus right next to the text, just like we want it. It's a little too big, so I'm going to resize it to 15 and 15 for its height and width. And then I can probably move it over a little bit more. So I'm going to do 5% and a top of 48%. And now it should be right where it needs to be. All right, cool. I'm actually going to drop it down to just 50, and that should be all we need. And actually 49, and we should be good. All right, so there we have our Venus. Now let's go ahead and add our Mars, which is going to be our red planet, doing the exact same thing we just did. So let me find this SVG file again to Chrome. And then I'm just going to view the page source and get the SVG code. I'm going to paste that in. Like so. And I'll get rid of the height and width again. I'll do a class of red planet. I'll go ahead and copy this from yellow planet to red planet and just adjust the size again. And then I'll just do the top and left to be tweaked until I get right in the position that I want. So I'm just going to keep raising this. All right, so there we go. We have our Neptune planet, our Mars planet, and our Venus planet, which are all SVGs. And we have them here into our web page on top of our infographic image. However, these three SVG images are dynamic, meaning we can change their CSS properties, unlike just having a plain static image. So this is where the fun really comes in the practical use of CSS animations. So let's go ahead and go to our blue planet. And let's go ahead and add our first animation. So let's do an animation, and we'll call this gravity. And let's say we want this to be 7 seconds long, and we want to repeat infinite. So what we want for this gravity animation, which we now have to define, is we're going to want to spin like any planet that was orbiting, and it's going to last 7 seconds. It's just going to spin in 360 degrees. So we define this as at keyframes, gravity, and at 0%, we don't want it to have spun at all, so we'll do transform, rotate, 0 degrees. And then at the end, so at our 100% mark, we're going to want it to have transformed to rotate 360 degrees. And then we're going to have this be repeated because we specified an infinite amount of iterations in our original animation statement. So now we have our planet spinning, and it's going to take 7 seconds for this spin to complete. So there we have our animation of gravity. Let's go ahead and add this animation to all of our other planets as well. And let's say for our smaller planets, we want the orbit to be a little bit quicker. So let's change it to 5 seconds. And so I'll paste this in. I'll keep the same animation. So it's doing that same change, which is transforming it by rotating it 360 degrees. But it's doing it for different durations. All right, so cool. We've got our first animation going on for making this a interactive infographic. We've got our planet spinning. Now what we could do is we could do a whole lot of things. So we could use something like Vue.js. So we can click on our planet and it might just zoom in on the specific content for that planet. So it might be something like where I can click on Neptune and everything, all these other images that we had created with SVGs would go away. And then we could have just the information be zoomed in for Neptune. There's a whole lot that you can do as long as you can export things as SVGs and then use CSS animations to control their CSS properties dynamically. So I'm not going to go through all the examples of how we could do something like this because it's going to be way too exhaustive and this could be a very time-consuming project that's not going to be good for doing a video like this. However, what I will do is I will show you how you can use Vue.js so we can change some CSS properties on a click. Therefore, if you were going ahead and making your actual interactive infographic, you can do something like I described where we're changing some properties on a click. So let's go ahead and write the code so we can have some changing of CSS properties for one of our SVG images on click. So first I'm going to go to the settings and I'm going to go under JavaScript. I'm going to add Vue.js. Vue.js is a progressive JavaScript framework that can be used for making dynamic web applications, but it's also really handy for just changing data that you can render in your HTML dynamically. So what I can do in this example is let's have it so if we click on one of these inner circles that it's going to change its color. So for example, we looked at one of these ellipse tags. So this is our yellow outer circle, for example, as we can see by the ID. And we have this style of a fill that is going to control the fill for this yellow planet. So what we can do with Vue.js is have it so we can have Vue.js control the fill value, and then we can have it so that value will change on click of that shape. So let's go ahead and start writing this out, and hopefully this makes a bit more sense. So first things first with Vue.js is that we have to define a Vue instance. So we do var app, which is going to be the name of our instance, and we'll do new Vue. And there's three things that we're going to need. First is we're going to need an L, which is going to have an ID to specify what belongs to this Vue instance. So I did an ID of app. So let me go and I'm going to add a div around all the things we already have for our infographic. And I'm going to add div ID equals app. And I'm going to add the closing div. And now it's telling HTML, okay, we've made the connection, so everything within this div ID app is going to be controlled with this Vue instance. So what can we control in our Vue instance? So we can control some data. And the data that we want to control is styling for our SVG images. We're just going to be doing our yellow outer circle fill. And so let's call this yellow outer circle fill. And this is the syntax if you want to do dynamic controlling of CSS values with Vue.js to override the CSS. So for example, we can do our fill, which we want to be controlled with Vue.js. So let's just put white. So we're going to have our yellow outer circle fill be white, and we're going to control it with Vue.js instead of CSS. So how can we do this? So we can go and we can find our yellow planet, and we need to make the communication with the shape that we want to control with this data that we had specified, which is yellow outer circle fill. So it's really easy with Vue.js. Here is the ellipse tag that we need, yellow outer circle, as you can see by the ID. So we're going to get rid of this style that is just controlling our fill. Instead, we're going to do v bind :style equal to, and so this is a syntax. So we're going to say we're going to bind the property with Vue.js. So in other words, we're making the connection. So Vue.js is going to be controlling or binding our style. So let's go ahead and put in our style the data that has some CSS properties being styled with Vue.js. So we can specify yellow outer circle fill in our vbind style, which we put in right between the quotes. So we do yellow outer circle fill vbind style, and so now the style for our yellow outer circle is going to be referenced by this data in our Vue.js instance, and it has a value of fill white. So if we look at our outer circle for our yellow planet, it's now being controlled with Vue.js instead of CSS. Now, an important thing to note here is that it's only going to override the style that we specify. So in our Vue.js, we specified a fill of white for our yellow outer circle. However, there's other properties that are being controlled with CSS, which are still unaltered because we only specified fill white. So what's really cool about this is this allows us to be updating CSS properties on events, or in other words, of user inputs. So let's have it so this yellow outer circle changes to white when the yellow outer circle is clicked. So I'm going to go and find the original yellow color that was this fill first. And I'm going to update our Vue.js so it starts off by having this fill by default. So instead of white, I'm just going to paste in our hexadecimal code. So now it's reverted back to the yellow color, and that's because we changed it from a fill of white to the fill of that hex code, which is this lighter yellow color. So now what we can do is we can add more to our Vue.js instance. So we're going to add methods. So what methods contains is functions, and these functions will manipulate the data. So specifically, this function is going to update the fill. So let's call it update fill. And so you do the name of the function, colon, and then you do function, like so. And here we're going to change the fill of yellow outer circle. So I mentioned that we want to change this when a user clicks on the outer circle. So how do we do that? Well, we have to put in an event handler, which thanks to Vue.js is actually really easy. So let's find this ellipse tag. So here is yellow outer circle, which is the one that we want to control. And let's put v on :click is equal to update fill. So how this works is it's saying on the click of this element, which is our ellipse tag for yellow outer circle, so when yellow outer circle is clicked, we're going to call a function which is called update fill. So if we go back to our Vue.js instance, we have update fill, and here we're going to change the CSS value for the fill, which is being controlled right now in Vue.js. So when someone will go ahead and click on this outer circle, it's going to call update fill, and in update fill, we'll change the fill from this to white. So to change our fill in this function, we first have to access or specify what data we want to change. So what is the data we want to change? Well, we want to change the fill. And where is our fill? Our fill is underneath yellow outer circle. And where is yellow outer circle? It's in the data for this Vue instance. So we specify it by doing this dot yellow outer circle fill dot fill. So we're saying this. So in our data, we have yellow outer circle fill. And in yellow outer circle fill, we have fill. And now we want to change this to white. So let's recap. So we're controlling the fill for the yellow outer circle of our yellow Venus planet by using a vbind style equals yellow outer circle fill. And here in our Vue.js instance, we have yellow outer circle fill, which is specifying the fill, which is giving it its hex code, which is this light yellow color. Now we added an event handler to yellow outer circle as well, using v_on_click equals to update fill. So on the click of our yellow outer circle, it's calling a function that we wrote called update fill, which is changing the fill in our Vue.js from this yellow hexadecimal code to white. So let's go ahead and test this out. So I go ahead and click on the yellow Venus circle, and now we see that the fill has changed to white once we clicked it. So let's define broadly what we have done here. We have taken first a template of an infographic that was missing some planets. We went ahead and made a container for that image and then put that image to fit that container. So this entire infographic is in a container which we specified with CSS. Now all of this is just a static image except for 3 planets that we made as vector graphics and then exported as SVGs and imported into our HTML. We then discussed what that SVG code does and what it actually is, and we've gone a step further and discussed how we can apply animations to those SVG images, and not just the entire SVGs as a whole, but the specific shapes that make up the images. And we really tested this out not only by adding our animations that make our planet spin, but we added some Vue.js so we could dynamically control the fill for just the outer circle of our Venus planet. And so when a user clicked on it, it would go from a fill of a light yellow color to a fill of white. So as far as making infographics yourself and what animations that you can use, that I'm going to leave up to you. And it's actually a pretty extensive process to create the vector graphic yourself for the entire infographic, export SVGs that you're going to dynamically update, and then writing the CSS animations or some Vue.js to control them. It can be a lot of work, but again, this is a really practical skill as infographics are really big right now in content marketing, and if you can add some animation to give them some life, that's a really marketable skill. And again, it shows how CSS animations can actually be very practical in the real world. Well, guys, I know that was a lot. My other videos for practical CSS animations aren't going to be so much, but hopefully that gives you an introduction into a lot of different things. SVGs, vector graphics, Vue.js, CSS animations, a whole bunch of different things. Now, if you're looking for more information about how to break down all those specific things I just mentioned and get a beginner's guide into them, we have a lot of resources for that already, and I'll link those into the description so you can dig into this more. If you already know how to do those things, hopefully this gives you inspiration to use those skills to make an interactive infographic. So thanks guys for checking out this video, and please make sure to like and subscribe our channel, and we'll see you next time.